Okay, we're good. Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm okay, Diana. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this. We
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate you being here. So, everyone, I want to introduce you my friend, Scott Omelianuk, or Scott O. He's the editor-in-chief of Inc. Scott is also a professor at Stevens Institute of Technology. He teaches entrepreneurship as well as marketing. Scott was actually 12 years at a company called This Old House as a creative strategist, handling user-generated content for social, for AR, for gaming, for lead gen, for digital, and technology. The most, I would say, interesting thing about Scott that I found out on his bio was he held a senior position in television, and he was the host and part of the creation of the first Real Housewives show. So please welcome my friend Scott. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you. So Lisa is going to MC, and Scott, do you have any questions about us before we get started?
No, but I want to offer a little defense, and Lisa, you can help me. I was one of the co-creators of the Real Housewives franchise, and we were actually fired after the first year when it was work for hire. So we did not benefit from the series or any of the spin-offs in the long term, which I suspect is a good punishment for having unleashed that catastrophe on the world. I had no idea at the time.
Don't call it that, Scott.
I'm sorry. I know it's your favorite program. It's different than what started out to be, and obviously it's grown a lot. But yeah, I did do that. But I was actually the host of something. We used to be in New York, a 24-hour fashion channel called Full Frontal Fashion, and I was a host there, and then went from there to sort of create with a friend, Real Housewives, or a couple of friends, Real Housewives.
So I'm like fascinated by Scott, and the reason is because Scott is one of these people that knows everybody. Obviously, because the fastest growing companies all apply to Inc. 5000 to be on the list, and I realized that I didn't realize. Obviously, it's such an honor to be on that list. But what's super surprising to me is I found out from Scott a few weeks ago that people sue Inc. when they're not on the list. I was like, what do you mean they sue you? Companies
It's
actually
sort of like
sue.
when Donald Trump used to threaten Forbes for not putting him on the 400 richest people list. So you guys have done great work, right, to achieve.
Can somebody mute?
Uh, is the
Sorry.
whole office in a fire alarm?
Sorry.
So you guys have done great work to be able to be in the Inc. 5000, and not only just in the Inc. 5000, but the Inc. 500, which is another significant cutoff, and then more than that in the 100 top companies. And that's really remarkable. And other companies like yours that have previously been in that sort of top layer include Microsoft and Facebook and Under Armour, Chobani, and Zipcar, and a bunch of others that you would just know because you use their products and services in some way every day. So there is a significant cachet out there in the world for this list, in particular the Inc. 5000. People use it to recruit with. I just got a note from someone who missed our last deadline for the Inc. 5000 this year saying, please, like a dog ate my homework story, but it would be their 8th time they would be on the list, and it's integral to their marketing efforts this year, right? So people use it to sort of as sort of proof of credibility for hiring people, for clients, and for investors. And oftentimes, if someone is betting on that sort of award from us because they're going to use it to raise money from, for example, they get really angry when they don't make it. And so we every year we are sued by one or two companies because we left them off the list and they think they should be on it. And so, yeah, it's actually pretty competitive and pretty significant. And for the people who care, it's a big deal. So, yeah, we sued.
Good luck getting on the list next year after pulling that stunt.
So we don't like hold it against them, right? And if they submit again, because they're paying us money to submit, an application costs money, they're allowed to come back. So, often they don't. Often it's a company on the bubble anyway, right? And they were hoping that this would help them in some fashion, and it doesn't, because they didn't get it, and then they go out of business. A couple of times it has been because the CEO is under federal indictment, for example. So one year we had someone who sold supplements on the list, and they were supposed to be these, energy providing, fat losing, muscle boosting supplements. And it turns out that they were, and they were because they had actual sort of controlled substances mixed in with all of the organic stuff. And so the government was suing him. And despite their sales, we thought it would be inappropriate to put someone on who was, literally pushing drugs into the market on unsuspecting people. So sometimes they do make the list, but they're not really legitimately on the list. And then we bump them off. And they'll never get back on. That guy's going to prison.
So the reason I wanted Scott to do the session with us, so first of all, I know it's super confusing for you guys because I introduced him as my good friend, and he is my good friend, but we only met about a few months ago, obviously way after we made the list. So we didn't go on the list because he's my friend, so just to make sure everybody is aware. And how I met Scott was because he hosted an event that I was involved during a town hall. And after that event, I reached out to him and asked him to have lunch with me during COVID. And I know that seems unusual for everybody here, but he said, I haven't gone out with anybody in over a year. And crazy girl over here reaches out, not once, not twice, 3 times, texts me and says, you have to go out to lunch with me, and forces me to go to this lunch. And so we have a great time, and we end up having a few more meals, and Scott and I became friends, got to know each other. And I realized from the stories that he's told me of the people that he speaks to. So I said to him, I want to meet with WeWork. And one email, he gets us a meeting with WeWork. He's on the phone with Sheryl Sandberg all the time from Facebook, and the different types of entrepreneurs. And I asked him all the time, like, what makes one entrepreneur better than the other? Or how do you know certain companies that are going to make it versus others? So these are the reasons that I wanted him to talk to us, because he's a founder himself. He started a business. He is the editor-in-chief of Inc. He actually teaches. He's a professor. He's done a lot in his lifetime, even been on television. So I thought he'd be a great person, a mentor to all of us, if we have any questions for him, to learn from what makes some of the companies the best in the best of the best. And how do we learn from those experiences and actually grow further and faster like those companies? So that's where I'm going to leave it. And go ahead, Scott.
We can leave it there, but I just wanted to say that I actually take my health very seriously. And it got to the point, Diana reaching out to me, that I actually felt it was more dangerous to say no to her than actually to go out at that point. So we went to lunch. I had a shot already, so I was okay. But all right.
It's okay, Scott, because this is exactly what I did to Matt Woodruff and Noman as well. I stalked.
We talked about it, yeah. Behind your back.
That's right. So,
To that last question that Diana posed, Scott, what are some of the signals that you're looking for, that you're like, you see it and you're like, oh, that's signals of a good company?
I think oftentimes, so it's hard to tell, right? That we actually run another program called Best Workplaces, and someone fills out an application and sends it to us. And in that application, everything can look really great, right? And we can think they're a really great company. But one of the things we do after that is actually survey the employees. And we have to get a certain percentage of responses back to know that it's legitimate, right? And not just one person filling out everyone's survey. And oftentimes there's a big difference. So it's hard to tell. And one of the things that's important to us is finding companies that are successful. For the Inc. 5000, we actually look at tax returns. We require businesses to send us tax returns or have their CPA sign an affidavit saying that the numbers are correct. So we take it quite seriously. So that part of it is sort of, baked in, right? So the list as it exists is pretty stable and pretty solid, and the people who are on it pretty much deserve to be on it. But then editorially, we look at other things, right? We kind of look at how the business came to be, who works there, who is the founder, what their story is. And oftentimes through that process, and we do this with maybe the top 500 people in the 5,000, we find really interesting stories, and we find the businesses that we think can provide the rest of the Inc. audience with really useful examples. And so that's how that's how Constellation was included in the print version of the Inc. 5000 list and on the website with the story featuring Diana. So for us, it's often or me, and I say this as someone who has been a consultant to businesses, someone who's tried to put new businesses together with investors in my role as Inc. There are some things that stand out, and it generally is about the founding team. And all of those businesses that I think impress me the most and that I've seen have the longest life and the highest growth comes down to having founders who may have been challenged in some way in the beginning and found ways to overcome those challenges, right? And they could be life challenges, or they could be challenges at work. They're people who don't take no for an answer, the way Diana didn't take no for an answer when she was asking me to go for coffee. They're people who find a way to get done what they need to get done, regardless of who's telling them it's not possible, or regardless of what stuff they might need to get it done, or what you and I might think, maybe not you guys, but what I might think, well, I need this, and this, otherwise I can't do it. The right founding team doesn't need any of that stuff and figures out a way to do it anyway. So they're savvy, scrappy, someone who they are people who don't take no for an answer, and they're people who have a goal and find a way to get there no matter what kind of roadblocks are put in front of them. And I think when I've gotten to know Matt and Diana and Ahmad, and I think that exists in all of them, and I think that's why Constellation is not only already a successful company but has a really bright future. Because all of those things work together. And you also look for harmony on a founding team, right? Like I was a founder, a co-founder of a wellness business that, by all rights during the pandemic, if it had lasted that long, should have been really successful. It sort of did something called, what we called augmented meditation, right? So if you imagine headspace or calm in the meditations that are there, if you now add sound therapy to it, and then one more step, you have that occur in a room with an LED wall that sort of uses light therapy that's sort of keyed to the sound, you can move people into different brainwave states, right? And so our startup, and the startup I wrote the patent for, which what was approved was to basically help people with their stress levels. The co-founder and I fought like two brothers who were born too close to each other. Like I fight with my brother, he's 2 years younger than me, and we just can't get along no matter what, right? And the co-founder and I, same thing. And it lasted for a couple of years, and we were moderately successful. We got a patent, we took some investment, and then one day I just realized, I can't. It was like a bad marriage, right? So I left, and shortly after the business sort of folded, and it still exists in a form, but not the same form. But the point is, though, that there's no business that can succeed when the founders aren't compatible, and they don't have the right chemistry. And so I think that's another thing, and I would say further, when we look at businesses in a much more rigorous way, we survey them. Some of the top 5 causes for business failure are all, there are about 20 reasons, and the top 5 are sort of like there's no market, the co-founders don't get along, and a couple of other things, right? And none of those are true when I look at a business like Constellation. So I know that having avoided all of those pitfalls, right? So just think about it, like no market, we've run out of money, and the founders don't get along, and a couple of other things. It sounds nightmarish, and it is for those businesses, and they fail because of it. You guys don't have that either, so that's another mark, I would say, Lisa. I talked a lot there, but those are the things that I impress me about businesses: founders with good stories, ones that know they have market traction and know how to overcome obstacles, how to get a grumpy hermit essentially out of his house into coffee.
It's definitely an art and not a skill to tell the future if a company is going to make it and what those signals are to pull. So Scott, we want to talk about you because it seems like you're a highly creative person. You've bounced around a lot, created your own thing. I mean, that says a lot about a person. How do you reconcile your creative side with your business side that has to look at the bottom line? And would you say that you're creative first or business first?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to which is I am first. So, not to bore you all to tears, but when I was in college, I was an art student, a painter, and I had an art history professor who one day took me aside and said, I think you're a better writer than you are a painter, and maybe you should consider something that would take advantage of that gift instead of the ones I didn't have. And she was right. And so that might sound insulting, but it was really useful advice. And I didn't know what to do with that, though. So I spent 2 years working as a carpenter and a garbage man, believe it or not, in the garment district in the city, trying to figure out how I was going to, fix a college degree that had let me do nothing, basically, and do something. And on a whim, I applied to graduate school at Syracuse University. They had a journalism program there at the Newhouse School, and I was accepted, one of 12 or 15 students at the time, and that landed me as a fact checker at GQ magazine. And the path from being a fact checker, which is sort of, the equivalent of a mailroom or something, one of the lowest jobs you can have, was you would hope to become a staff writer, and then from staff writer to an editor or a senior writer or something like that. But one of what the editor-in-chief thought was baptism by fire, that the writers who were going to follow that path had to do all the magazine's fashion copy first. So I started doing that, and I started writing fashion copy. It was not considered serious journalism. People didn't want to do it, but I enjoyed it, and I think there was some aesthetics that sense that I had that allowed for it. But the most important thing it did was it showed me how the business, at least for magazines like Vogue and GQ work, is that there's a real arrangement between the fashion coverage that they do and the people, the designers, right, and the advertising they take. And because it's quite different here in the States, but in Europe, there's a sense of quid pro quo, right, where if you give me one page of fashion coverage, I will give you one page of advertising. And that sort of gave me this window into the business side, which fascinated me. And so I started traveling to Europe every couple of months with our publisher and other people, and I was the editorial representative. But the whole experience was sort of business related one, because I was just going back to the office and writing these little captions, or occasionally profile of Giorgio Armani or someone like that. And it was the business stuff that I spent most of the time on. And so I think that's how, Lisa, I got that start. And then I was curious, that didn't go away. So when I moved into new roles, I always wanted to see what the new business opportunity was. So I left GQ and I went to Esquire magazine. So this is going to sound ridiculous, but at that time, magazines were really significant and 300 pages thick, and the internet was sort of just a baby. And so I had the opportunity to create the first website for Esquire. And it seems odd that but there was a time when the first websites had to be created. I did not understand why we would not charge for it. That was my business sense. And of course, the industry didn't do that. And that's why they're so reliant on advertising right now, right? And why places like Facebook and Google, which are better at advertising, now Amazon, have 90% of the market, and traditional media outlets have so much less. So I kept doing that, finding these new opportunities within this sort of framework of traditional journalism, because I had this business sense and I wanted to find out what the new thing was. And so that is sort of where the business sense came from, I guess.
So hearing your story, it sounds like you really got a windfall or the jump start when you decided to take on a category that was rather overlooked and niche, and you really focused on it and made it your own.
I think that's an interesting question, and I think to some extent that's true, right? In a room full of people who wanted to be real journalists, and by that I meant people who were, covering the various Gulf and Middle East conflicts, Gulf War and Middle East conflicts that we had, or wanted to do significant profiles of famous people. That was that was all fine and good, and that's what they wanted to do, and no one really wanted to deal with the fashion copy. So yes, I took advantage of that, and it provided some runway. That was not, I didn't intend that pun, fashion runway.
Based on your story and the other stories we've been hearing of folks who come here monthly, it's very similar, that they took on, like we had Jim Salicrup last month, and he took on Spider-Man, which was at the time, nobody wanted to touch. They were like, go crazy with it. It doesn't sell.
Yeah, he was my least favorite superhero, I have to say. I can totally get that.
Scott, we're going to have words about that. I'm sorry. That's
It's fine. We can. I think there's often opportunity that allows for people to be very successful because someone else sees it as undesirable, or someone doesn't see the potential in it. And I think, to some extent, again, that's really true with figuring out here at Constellation, figuring out an advertising opportunity for the auto market that didn't exist. And not only just figuring that out, but now being able to take that and move into so many different markets is right. That was the opportunity. No one else was taking it. And so I think that's a really interesting corollary.
What I have to say about that is, but what you don't know is that the sweater is not just blue. It's not turquoise. It's not lapis. It's actually cerulean.
Can someone help me to respond to that?
Oh my God, Lisa.
I guess that's between me and folks.
Amanda Priestley.
Yes. My gosh.
I didn't think the sweater was. I'm trying to think. I don't.
Oh no, it's from The Devil Wears Prada, where
and
it's
yeah.
what she defends the fashion industry.
Yeah.
Oh, Matt came back on video for that. It'll show up for Meryl Streep.
Of course.
I try to act as much like Anna Wintour as possible, actually.
Really?
Not at all.
that doesn't track.
Well, Scott, we also want to know, as you you took this niche, you kept going with it, and as you kept going, did you find success that you could keep moving forward as a very strong individual contributor, or did you have to learn management skills and do?
That's another interesting thing, I think, in particular with journalism, is there is no traditional career path or set. You don't talk about career management and and I go from, a director to a vice president or any of that stuff. And I think that happens a lot in what are considered talent-based industries. So actually, all of my management experience was essentially learned either in therapy or couples therapy or something like that, and not in any traditional way. And also going on all of those sales calls and seeing what triggered people and what made them interested and what didn't, and how the good salespeople we had tried to solve problems for the clients, and the bad salespeople we had didn't do that, right? The co-founder of the business I was with always told his story when he got to a client instead of asking them about theirs. And that was one of our big points of friction. And so I think, it was nothing formal. It was more just sort of learned on the job, and recognizing, what people are like and what motivates them and what doesn't. And I have to say, sometimes I know exactly what it is and I know how to get someone there, and I still don't want to do it, right? So management's not easy. You have to sort of, you never get to consider yourself first. In fact, I was talking to a group of Inc. 5000 founders a couple of weeks ago, and I asked them all about their biggest challenge in the last year or so. And they all said it was how do we keep our team fully employed when things are so uncertain, right? When the pandemic's here, when in some cases our revenue just disappeared. And all of them said they had literally lost sleep at night, trying to figure out how to keep their teams employed. And so you do that, right? And of course you can't ever turn around to the employees and say, I jump through hoops so you could keep your job or something like that, right? You can't. So there's a lot of work you do in management that you do without recognition, that you do for people who might seem occasionally ungrateful, but you do it because you know that what they can bring to the table is really useful for the business. And ultimately, if that person has that foible, someone else is going to have another one, and God only knows you have a bunch yourself.
Great insights, Scott, both for our sales team and for folks who, just see Matt and Diana zooming around.
Yeah.
And being like, why are they so stressed? So at this point, I would love for some folks have had questions that they put in our Slack. I would love to invite Sammy if she's in the house. I know she has client calls, so she might have to have jumped off. Is Sammy here? If she's not, it's all right. I have a great Sammy Berlin question here, and it's really like, how did you even begin the concept of Real Housewives? Since that is like that, it's so strange and yet it's so catchy.
So there's an interesting story to tell really quickly before that is, so I was hosting on this 24-hour network. It was owned by Cablevision, Full Frontal Fashion. And one day, Jim Dolan, who owns the company, or owned the company then, who owns the Knicks, maybe if any of you are Knicks fans, he's sort of an odd and evil and quixotic guy. He just decided that we weren't going to do fashion anymore, and we were launching a new channel called Naked in New York. And Naked in New York was all about sex, basically. And I thought that that didn't seem good for my personal brand somehow, to be on that channel, which only lasted a few months as well. And so I left and had an opportunity to audition for another television show. Interestingly enough, at the same time, my best friend, who I had brought to Esquire as a writer, had the opportunity to interview for a new show that was being called Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. So we both had these interviews at the same time.
Wait, who's your best friend? Who's your best friend?
Ted Allen. So he's now the host of Chopped.
Yes.
I've known him for 5 years, I guess. So Ted got, he went on his audition and got the part in the original Queer Eye, which was a cultural,
Dynamo.
deal. Thank you. Thank you. I went to this audition for this show they were looking for a guy to be on with Stacey London. And I went through a series of auditions, and basically you were playing to a monitor, just like we are right now, right? Where she and I would stand in a room and I'd comment on what people were wearing, and we'd just see if the banter was right. And they asked me back. There were 2 finalists, and they asked me back. And at the last time, so the show was originally a BBC show, and the person from the BBC flew in, and Stacey and I got up to do our bit, and it's like literally there's a monitor sitting on a stool in a big room, and there's a long table with like 4 or 5 people sitting behind it with clipboards staring at us. And we went through this whole thing, and of doing this banter and this critique and stuff like that. And the woman from the BBC said, how do you know so much about women's clothes? And I said, well, I worked at GQ and the Fashion Channel, and while I mostly wrote about men's clothes often at that time, sort of followed the pattern of women's clothing to some extent, fabrics and colors and stuff like that. And then she said, and then I offered, I've always liked to pay attention to what, my girlfriends wore. And she was like, do you mean girlfriend, or girlfriend? And I was like, the woman I live with. And she said, thank you for coming. Right. And the audition was over because they needed to have a gay man criticize a woman's wardrobe, right? They couldn't have a straight guy sitting there doing that, which I was. And so that audition was over immediately. And Clinton Kelly, who was the other guy there, became the host for a really long time. So I went to a friend who was a television producer, and I said, what am I gonna do now? Because I thought I was a shoo-in for this television show. And he's like, well, I have this buddy in Orange County who talks about these people that he just says they're so outrageous, you have to come with a video camera and just talk to them. And we're like, that doesn't sound like much, does it? And he said no, and we decided though, well, maybe it's worth the trip. And now I wasn't working, right? So I could take a trip. Couldn't really afford it, but I could take it. And we went there, and it was sort of one of the most remarkable experiences I've ever had in my life, because everyone was already playing a role. They needed no coaching. There was nothing that happened in that first season that wasn't real. Like everyone sort of was already a character. And we just filmed them talking. Now the style was a little bit different than Bravo is. Bravo wasn't what it is now, right? Where I think Andy Cohen created a style that made it a really particular thing. So the original version was a little bit more gritty, a little bit more, not like gritty like a 70s cop film, but just was a little bit more real, and a little less sort of technicolor. But those people just did it themselves. We made a short tape of them just behaving as themselves, and we took it to a guy at Bravo at the time, and he was like, let's do this, we'll get a season. But as a lot of, unless you're a really dominant producer, you do television work as a work for hire, which means you don't own the idea. You can be a creator. And so we gave creator credit. As we were making this, we were like pouring all the money we were being paid right back into the production, because we thought this was going to be a long-term opportunity, right? So we actually made no money. And we were like, what are we going to do for the guy who introduced us? And basically it was, well, we can give him creator credit. So creator credit is actually the way you can make money even when you're not a work for hire, basically because you're the creator, you own a part of the original idea. So this guy who just introduced us to these people in Orange County has now made millions of dollars off of that version in every subsequent spin-off version, and we've not made a dime. So that is how the Real Housewives work.
Wow. Scott, you told me something about Ted when he actually was interviewing. You'd mentioned he was still married. Was that true?
No. No, he lived with his boyfriend, but his family didn't. His family didn't know he was gay, so he came out to his family because of the show.
Wow. That's great.
So,
Well, Scott, I love that you take us to you tell us a story that is rarely told, like what is the real behind all the glam, like, hey, I could barely afford a flight to Cali. Like, if we want to live this glam life or reproduce shows, be a writer, do fashion, like, are we going to be broke? Until we get the creators credit?
I can't answer that question, but no, I mean, I at different places, right? I was broke because I owned a house. I had bought a brownstone, and so I needed money to pay the mortgage, right? So that's why I was broke. I could have sold the house and been fine, right? Like, at every stage of my life, I'd done well enough to, with the exception of the startup, which, we didn't take salaries from and lasted for 2 years. That's the only time in all of this stuff where I actually didn't make a living wage. Yeah. I mean, or you could say that you don't make a living wage as a professor either, unless you're a tenured professor. I'm not that, right? I don't have a PhD. I was asked to teach because I gave a speaking engagement at the school when they liked what I had to say. So they had some open slots, asked me to fill in. And so, adjunct professors don't make anything, right?
Yeah.
It's a tough thing. But otherwise, yes, I make a living wage everywhere else. And I suspect you guys will too.
The question behind that is really like, what is your risk tolerance? Because all of us want to find that success and to be able to be creative and make all these things. Like, how should we be viewing our risk tolerance? Give us a sanity check.
I think more than risk tolerance, deep down whether you have to do something or not. And if you're a person who needs to be a founder and who has an idea, there's going to be risk, but you're going to find a way to attenuate it and accomplish what you want to accomplish. But beyond that, I think when we look at research, there are two significant opportunities for entrepreneurship. And by the way, entrepreneurship in the United States has been in decline actually for the last 40 years, actually, since the late 70s. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that, there's a media culture around entrepreneurship that makes us think startups are everywhere, and if you're not in one, you're a loser and stuff. And the fact is that there are fewer startups than there have ever been, and I think that has to do with the fact that we don't. Life costs more now, and there aren't safety nets that we have, right? So by that I mean. School costs a lot of money. And if you go to school and you graduate with $200,000 in student debt, like some of my students do, you're going to work at McKinsey or Accenture or Goldman Sachs, right? You're not going to be a founder. The other part of it is, so you have to graduate with a little debt. And so there's this opportunity there when you don't have a lot of other responsibilities, say maybe your parents, you have an opportunity to be an entrepreneur. So we see entrepreneurs fall into two really big buckets. One is people in their early 20s, right? Because they have no obligations yet, unless it's student loans for the most part. And then the other is people who are 45 and older. And that's because in that middle part, when, as most people anyway do, they sort of want to have a family, they buy a house, they suddenly have all of these obligations. Health insurance is a really big deal when you have a bunch of kids running around, right? Not just for yourself. And so you don't take that risk. It's only after your kids get to a certain age or you've established yourself in a certain career where suddenly entrepreneurship becomes a possibility again. And what's really interesting though, is that those entrepreneurs, the 45s and older, are far more successful and have much greater, faster growing businesses than the younger group does. And that's because, like we would presume Diana has, she's got a wealth of experience in the real world. She's got a significant network that she built up. She's had challenges, both personal and professional that she's had to overcome. And so all of those things make you better at what you do. And then sometimes there's real magic when you can pair, when you can pair an entrepreneur who's older with someone who's younger and has ideas and energy. And that's not to suggest you don't have those, Diana, but I'm just saying that often we see remarkable stuff happen when there actually is an age differential in the founding team. If they can get along and over that first hump, that those two different perspectives make for really magical stuff.
Scott,
Scott, go ahead.
sorry, Lisa. Scott, what is the age group that makes the most successful companies out there?
So so it's 45 and over are the fastest growing and most successful, least likely to go out of business are people 45 and older.
Diana,
Which we wouldn't think from the way media treats entrepreneurship. We see a very tiny slice of what entrepreneurship really is, because we're like largely looking at Silicon Valley or something, right? And that's because that seems sexy, and that's where people in their college dorms cook up an idea and become billionaires. But that really doesn't happen nearly as often as you would think. It's a sexier story somehow to most people.
And for you now, Scott, after you've learned all about startups and being in startups yourself, are you going to do another startup, or is this it for you?
It depends on, so I think another thing about entrepreneurship that is really hard to crack is that, it's pretty lonely, right? And it's not just lonely in the way a lot of managers feel lonely, where they feel like the people above them are sort of yelling down at them, and the people below them are yelling up, and their spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever doesn't understand any of it, and they can't talk about it. So they feel lonely, right? Entrepreneurs have another layer of loneliness because the organization is just theirs, right? And they don't have this escape hatch that other people do. So I would say the idea of, for me, and I think the thing that's hardest to do is find the right partner to do something with. And I think that will determine whether I ever do something again like that, Lisa. It's finding the right person to do it with, and having that complementary skill set, and being able to make something more out of what you could do just by yourself. And that is luck to some extent, and we know, just read a study about how much people underestimate good fortune in building their own fortunes. And so it's hard. You can meet a lot of people and it'd be wrong, right? Like you can date a lot of people, think you found the one, and of course half of those end up not happening, right? Or there's a divorce that happens in there. There's a luck factor there. You still put in hard work. Everyone puts in hard work, but sometimes there's a little fairy dust. And so if that happens, great. And if it doesn't, I'm content at Inc. for a while, and
Well, that dovetails.
I have to say, I get excited by being able to meet founders and the people who work at companies like yours. And that is, you thanked me for being here, but I was far more interested and far more grateful for being able to get a window into Constellation, because it is, it's exciting. I had a long career in media. I left it, and I sort of came back only because it put together a whole bunch of skill sets I had, right? So having been an editor and a television person and a digital person, and then having been an entrepreneur and teaching entrepreneurship, being on the MIT Enterprise Forum, all of these things made it really smart choice to pick me for the editor of Inc., right? And I thought the same. I thought I could use all of these different skills I've had and get to meet all of these people who are doing really special things without taking any of the risk myself, right? Now, sometimes I'm jealous when, one of these companies like sells for $400 or $500 million or $1 billion or whatever it is. I get a little jealous, I have to admit that. But it's also still so cool to see the energy and the excitement and the ideas and people working really hard to achieve something. Because I'm in an industry that's in terminal decline, right? Media is just sort of not what it used to be. and it can be difficult because of that. But this is exciting.
Well, Scott, what you said really dovetails nicely into another of the questions that we had, which is around people. You're like, I need to find the right person in order to be a co-founder. I want to know about the employees that you've had and that you would hire over and over again for every startup, because it's not really about their skills, right? I assume that you generally hire generalists, or is that a wrong assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to hire people who are smart and who you like, and that you'll get along with, and think that they can go anywhere. When I hire someone, or even with the staff that I inherited, right? So I came to Inc. only a little more than a year ago. I was in the office for 6 weeks before we went remote, so I didn't even meet everyone who worked for me when we went remote. But one of the things that I think can make work really interesting and can let chemistry kind of happen is to understand that people have a particular role that they have to fulfill, but then like encourage them to figure out what else excites them and carve out time for them to do that. And I think if you've already hired people who are smart, curious, interesting, hardworking, and someone you can laugh with, I think you're capable of doing so much more. And what their title is just a title, and you can do so much more than that. So that is really what I think about when I hire people. It's not whether they it's not whether they pass the A test better than anyone else to get some score on a particular skill set, because I'm presuming that I'm looking for people who'd be excited about mastering any new skill set that comes along, right? And so in one previous job that you mentioned, This Old House, which has been a public television show for 40 years, it actually just last week was sold to Roku. It's still going on. It had a website and a magazine, books and products and things like that. I had editors who became television producers. I had graphic designers who became actors, or at least hosts. We had all sorts of different people doing things, and our copy editor played the banjo and wrote the scores to all of our content, or all our video content. Like unlocking all of these other opportunities, I think makes it really interesting. And I think it also makes you somewhat less likely to have your career go to hell, right? Like, the more skills you have and the more willingness you are to adapt to a new opportunity, it's just like, it's like trouble-proofing your career to some extent. And that's not a bad thing anymore, because change happens so fast. Even Fortune 500 companies cycle through the Fortune 500 in just 13 years now, on average, right? It used to be 60. So that's so dynamically changed, and change will only increase. And so if you can think about that, and if you can embrace every new change rather than resist it. When I was at This Old House, and another thing that seems strange is we had forums, right? Like on the website, people would answer each other's questions, and they were so interesting and so active that I decided that we would create a whole magazine that was by these people who were on the website. And that was the first time anyone, in fact, it won Ad Age's Idea of the Year, because no one had done user-generated content before. That was a traditional media outlet, right? And now it seems ridiculous that they wouldn't have that. We did a mobile game too, and it seemed at the time maybe it was difficult to sell to my bosses, but now lots of brands have games, right? So I think it's about just thinking what's possible all the time, and if you hire right, you have those people to do that with.
Thank you for going into This Old House. We actually had quite a few questions about that in our
into a new apartment. That's my answer to all of you.
In the last 9 minutes that we have, I think everyone here is truly just dying for the most memorable, potentially problematic, fun, exciting celebrity interview encounter or project that you ever done with a celeb. I know people here are dying for that story.
Do you know what it is, or do you have something in mind?
No, I don't. You've
Okay.
met so many celebrities. You have
I,
so many.
I can tell you. So one of the only times I will say the person I've never it again. This is something that might have been a moment in time. But when I was at Esquire, we photographed Bill Clinton, and I, out of all of the celebrities I interviewed when I was at GQ and at Esquire, and met through television and things like that, there was no one that could come close to his level of charisma. It was kind of astonishing. I have no idea what it is or how to explain it, but it was remarkable. The only time I embarrassed myself was, so when I was a little kid, I had a crush on Andy McDowell, and I was going out. I went out to Los Angeles to interview her for some movie she was in. I forget what it was called, but I think it was Mannequin, or I don't know. I don't remember, but um, I was waiting for her. It's this like condo in Pacific Palisades where she was staying, and I was waiting in the living room. She was upstairs. I was waiting for her to come down, and there's this staircase that comes down. And I don't know if you guys know who she is, right? But she has like long, flowing, curly hair and this very honey toned accent, Southern accent. Um, and I was looking at a book or my notebook or whatever. So she sort of surprised me. She had gotten halfway down the stairs before I realized it. And so, right. So not only did I used to have this crush on her, I sort of looked up, and here she was like floating. She was in a long dress and basically floating down the stairs. And she put out her hand to shake my hand, and I stood up, and she said, "Hi, I'm Andy." And she went like this, and I went, "Hi, I'm Scott." And I was just staring at her, and I shook the air because I totally missed her hand because I was enthralled by her. And that was probably my most embarrassing celebrity.
Oh my God. So
I just love how thoughtful you were in that you talked about these like fun stories in relation of like you messing up or like you having this reaction versus like they did this. I think it's very thoughtful.
Well, I mean, like, at a certain point, that's what happened. So I'm truthful. So, you know, yeah. So Andy McDowell embarrassed me. Bill Clinton impressed me. Um, I was not allowed to make eye contact with Madonna. So this is another.
Scott, who was the most fascinating person that you met, celebrity wise?
You know, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because you don't actually get to know them very well, right? They're very practiced in having a facade. And in some cases, that facade is like sort of nearly literal. Like with Madonna, it was she stayed in the corner, surrounded by three people. You didn't make eye contact until it was time to. You were literally told that. And so I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We'll have to. Uh, Maybe that's a story that'll come to me over a drink sometime, Diana. I'm not sure who that is.
And would you say that they all had a common theme? Like, was it drive that got them to where they are? What do you think it was?
Yeah, I think there's that same thing that I think exists in entrepreneurs. It is this. Um, it either is an absolute need or an internal drive to achieve something, because it's hard. There's lots of competition, and there's lots of things in your way, and there's lots of reasons to give up and say no. I was told no on television, and I gave up. I didn't go out on another audition, and I didn't produce. Until I got to This Old House, I didn't produce another television program. So and that's a difference, and that's why I'm not a successful entrepreneur, right? I was much more comfortable inside what was at the time. This Old House belonged to Time Inc., which belonged to Time Warner, which was the largest, media company in the world at the time. That was safe, actually. So I think that's the difference: the willingness to take the risk and the drive to see it through, no matter what happens. The people who are able to do that, we can, they're either batshit crazy or they're really impressive. so I'm going to leave that one open for the folks at Constellation to decide about Matt and Diana.
I know what side I'm.
But I think those are the two things, right? You're either one or the other, and not everyone is like that.
Yeah. And you know, it's fascinating from what you said is, you know, there's people that take risk with other people. And I don't know if everybody knows this on this Zoom, but I didn't know Matt. I didn't know Scott. I didn't know Lisa. I didn't know Noman. And, you know, Matt and I met through LinkedIn. Like people thought that we knew each other. Nobody knew each other. And we all took a risk with each other. And here we are, right? And so it's a fascinating thing about all of us. Even David Johnson, I didn't know him, and he moved here from Colorado. And so what we did together is a lot of what Scott is describing is that we just took risks with each other, not knowing each other and really counting on the fact that they would actually deliver what they said they would deliver. And here we are.
And our last question comes from Twee, our latest VP, and she asks, I see your stack of books behind you. What else are you reading right now? And then we do have a book club here at Constellation, so this will provide a lot of.
So this is my fake stack of books here, these blue ones, which are all startup books that I put behind me when I talk to my students. That's a library full of all sorts. Right now I'm reading Premonition, which is a book about 3 people who knew how bad the pandemic was going to be and tried to do everything they could to let authorities know, and who ultimately, despite us not having the right response initially, were responsible for making it much less worse than it could. It's by Michael
Lewis.
Thank you, Michael Lewis.
All right, thank you so much for your time, Scott. I think we got a great download. It was very exciting, and we are grateful for your time. It was like a free university sesh.
Lisa, I gotta tell you something. I have to tell you something what Scott said when he went out to dinner with you, me, Adam, Patricia, Matt, and our PR team. So during the dinner, he turns over to me after you were actually saying some jokes, and he goes, "There's a TV show here." That's what he said.
I think it's possible.
I have been optioned for 3 actually. Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
And you always like demand terms that are too hard to fulfill, and so the option goes away.
Straight up. You know what it be.
Lisa needs to do her own lunch and learn one time.
That's right.
You guys, in real seriousness, just really quickly, after that dinner that Diana mentioned, where I got to experience Lisa, I went back to work, obviously, the next day, and I had asked some of our digital designers to put together a gallery experience for us, like a mock-up of it, because I wanted to see what that would look like for some types of content that we would have on the website. And I flip over the first page, and every other mock-up that they've created was a picture of Lisa. And I immediately thought I was being played. I had no idea how that happened. But it turns out you were the subject of ink too.
God, stop ignoring the signs given to you by God. Look at with me. Get the creator credit and get millions.
Yes.
Startling.
I'm ignoring it. I mean, like, how much more does God have to do for you to make the show about me? All right, thank you so much, Scott, and thank you, Diana, so much for roping him in to our lunch and learn.
Well, thank you guys all. And Scott, thank you so much for doing this. We love you, and we love this hour with you, and we love getting to know you, and we know that we'll continue our relationship with you. So thank you so much for doing this for all of us.
Of course, an honor to be here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Scott. Bye, everybody.
Bye.